The snow blew across the highway like pale ghosts drifting in the night. Jonas Hall tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the radio crackled with a chilling announcement. Christmas Eve warning. A masked intruder has been spotted near the northern woods. Police advise residents to stay indoors. He exhaled, a cloud of frost fogging the windshield. Perfect. Just what he needed while driving the graveyard shift for Frostline deliveries. He had one final stop, a remote cabin in the pines, its presence marked by a single, warm window in the suffocating darkness. The package on the passenger seat rattled softly. It was small, light, and oddly, disturbingly warm. He parked the van and stepped out into the howling wind. The forest loomed around him, a wall of black teeth gnashing at the edges of the clearing. As he crunched through the snow toward the porch, he noticed fresh footprints. They were large, deep, and split at the toe like hooves. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold crawled up his spine. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open on its own, revealing the silent interior. "Hello," Jonas called out, his voice sounding small against the roar of the wind. The only reply was the crackle of a dying fire in the hearth. Hesitantly, he stepped inside. The room was quaint, almost painfully cozy. Stockings hung neatly from the mantelpiece. A Christmas tree glittered in the corner, adorned with twinkling lights and colorful ornaments. Everything looked perfectly normal, except for the mask sitting on the dining table. It was a reindeer face, hand-carved from dark wood. The horns were splintered into sharp, jagged points, and the eyes, they were just hollow pits, lined with something that looked disturbingly like dried animal sinew. As he stared at it, Jonas felt the warmth from the package in his hands intensify. Suddenly, the lid popped open with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of red velvet, was a folded card. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. The note was written in a frantic, spidery script. "Put it on before he arrives." Jonas dropped the card as if it were burning him. "What the hell?" he muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. Just then, a heavy hoofstep echoed on the porch right behind him. Jonas spun around. A figure stood in the doorway, a monstrous silhouette against the swirling snow. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and wrapped in ragged furs stitched together like a winter coat made of dead things. And on its face was a reindeer mask. But this one wasn't wood. It was bone, yellowed, and ancient. Its antlers, real and massive, scraped against the doorframe as it ducked to enter the cabin. Jonas stumbled backward, his legs turning to jelly. I don't want any trouble," he stammered, his voice cracking. The creature inhaled deeply, its nostrils flaring like a beast scenting prey. When it spoke, its voice was a low, cold rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You brought it." It pointed one crooked, clawed finger at the warm package Jonas was still clutching. Jonas's chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. "I'm just a delivery driver," he pleaded. "I don't know what's going on." The creature took a heavy step closer, and the floorboards groaned in protest. "You wear the mask?" it growled, its voice laced with a terrifying hunger. "Or I feed." Jonas's eyes darted to the wooden reindeer mask on the table. In the flickering firelight, it almost seemed to be breathing. The creature's shadow fell over him, a cold, suffocating blanket. "Choose," it commanded. With shaking hands, Jonas snatched the wooden mask from the table. The moment his fingers touched it, a strange pulse throbbed through the wood like a frantic heartbeat. His fingers locked around it, and he found he couldn't let go. "No, no, no, no," he whispered, a desperate prayer to an empty room. The mask snapped onto his face of its own accord. A searing pain erupted as the wood seemed to melt, fusing with his flesh. Straps, like living snakes, tightened around his head, burrowing into his skin. His jaw was forced open as wooden splinters pushed into his muscles, rooting themselves deep inside him. Jonas screamed, but the sound that came out was warped, inhuman, a guttural shriek of animal terror. The creature of bone and fur stepped back and respectfully bowed its head. "Another joins the herd," it rumbled. The cabin lights flickered violently. Every ornament on the tree rattled, and the room began to spin. Jonas felt an agonizing crack as his spine stretched and contorted. His teeth sharpened into points, and his hearing exploded with a new, terrifying clarity. The gentle sound of snowflakes hitting the window now sounded like a frantic drumbeat. A final, Sickening crack shivered through his entire body as ant, sharp and wooden, burst through the top of his skull. He collapsed to the floor, his mind shattering. Winjihozi, his vision was blurred and tinted red. The creature offered him a clawed hand. "Come," it said. He followed it outside into the blizzard. The forest was no longer empty. Doesn't snow? Hundreds of figures stood silently between the pines. All masked, all twisted into monstrous shapes, all waiting in the snow. The leader, the one made of bone, let out another low rumble. "Tonight," it declared, "we hunt the noisy ones." A primal hunger coiled in Jonas's stomach, ancient, cold, and demanding. He didn't know who Jonas was anymore. He only knew the herd. He ran with them into the night, his new hooves striking the snow in a thunder of malice and hunger. The next morning, Christmas Day, police found the remote cabin. The front door was wide open, the interior a scene of chaos. The table was overturned. The Christmas tree was shattered, its lights dark. Blood stained the floorboards, and on the floor, amidst the debris, lay a single package. It was still warm to the touch. The tag on it was addressed to the next carrier. Inside, resting on red velvet, was another wooden reindeer mask, waiting. In the town of Hollow Pines, snow fell like a promise and a threat, swallowing every sound. It was the kind of quiet that feels stage 2 perfect. Every year, on the evening of December 23rd, the townsfolk observed the silent carol, a tradition older than the town itself. At 7 o'clock sharp, every light was extinguished, every voice silenced. For 1 full hour, the town held its breath. No speaking, no music. The elders claimed the ritual was a shield, a cloak of silence to hide the town from something ancient, something that listened from the dark. Most people, especially the younger generation, dismissed it as folklore, a quaint, spooky tradition. Mara Quinn was one of them. She considered it an old wives' tale, something her grandmother clung to with a near religious terror. But this year was different. Her grandmother was in the hospital, and the responsibility of upholding the family's silence fell to Mara. She didn't believe in stories. She believed in podcasts. At 6:59 p.m., Mara sat in the suffocating darkness of her living room. The town-wide announcement had echoed through the streets an hour earlier. A stern reminder. The silent carol begins at 7. Stay quiet. Whatever, she thought, rolling her eyes. She had her own plans. A new episode of her favorite horror podcast had just dropped, and she'd been waiting for months. She slipped on her headphones, a smirk playing on her lips as she cranked up the volume, ready to defy the town's silly rule. The narrator's voice, a gravelly whisper, began, but the first line wasn't what she expected. For those listening during the silent carol, the voice said, "Stop." Mara froze. That wasn't in the show notes. It felt personal. She glanced at her phone. The clock ticked over. 7 p.m. the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't in her headphones. It was in the room with her. "They can hear you." A sound broke the stillness. A soft, rhythmic tapping on her living room window. It wasn't a knock. Not exactly. It was a pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Was it Morse code? Or was it mimicry? The street outside was a swirl of heavy snow, blurring the world into a fuzzy, indistinct landscape. There was no one out there. Her heart began to thud, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, far too loud in the oppressive silence. She crept closer to the window, peering into the white chaos. The tapping stopped. Then a second window answered. From the kitchen, the same pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Then the back door. Then a window upstairs. The attic. The entire house became an orchestra of rhythmic tapping, a chorus of unseen fingers. Her phone buzzed, a violent vibration against her palm. An unknown number. The message was short and chilling. "Stop making noise. They hear heartbeats." Mara clamped a hand over her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. This had to be a prank. Some elaborate, town-wide joke to scare the one person who dared to break the rules. It had to be... But then a second message arrived. It was a picture of her living room, taken from just outside the window she was standing near. She hadn't seen a flash. She hadn't seen anyone. She was being watched. The house itself seemed to groan. The floorboards creaked, not with the random settling of an old home, but with slow, deliberate bends, as if an immense weight was moving across the beams above her head, distributing itself across the entire structure. The lights flickered on, all of them, but they weren't connected to the switch. She hadn't touched anything. In the sudden, pale glow, the shadows in the room behaved unnaturally. They stretched, not outward along the floor as shadows should, but upward, climbing the walls like ink spilled against gravity. They were tall. Their limbs were too long, too thin. They had no faces, only hollow, gaping voids where features should be. One of them, a silhouette of impossible angles, raised a single, spindly finger to where its lips would have been, and shooshed her. Mara felt the air thicken, pulsing like the entire house was holding its breath. The shadow creatures tilted their featureless heads in unison, listening for her. Her heart hammered against her chest, a desperate, frantic rhythm she couldn't control. Thump, 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 thump. One of the figures took a step forward, detaching itself from the wall. Its movement was fluid, wrong. Thump. A deep, resonant voice vibrated from the hollow in its chest, a sound that felt more like a physical force than a noise. Just as the creature reached for her, the front door clicked open. Someone stepped inside, a small figure silhouetted against the snowy night. A sharp whisper cut through the room's terrifying stillness. Mara. It was her grandmother. She was supposed to be miles away, safe in a hospital bed. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with a fury Mara had never seen. "Don't speak," she mouthed, her expression rigid with terror. She grabbed Mara's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled her back. In her other hand, Grandma held a small, tarnished silver bell, intricately carved with runes Mara didn't recognize. The silent carol bell. She lifted it and rang it once. The sound that erupted wasn't the bright chime of metal. It was vast, ancient, like a choir singing from the depths of the ocean. It filled the house, a wave of impossible harmony. The shadow beings jerked violently, freezing mid-step, their forms wavering like smoke in a breeze. Grandma shoved Mara toward the hallway, her eyes screaming a single, silent word. Run. They burst through the back door and into the blizzard. The cold air and stinging snow, a shocking slap to the face. Behind them, the house itself seemed to scream, a sound that was not human, not animal. It was an overwhelming, alien howl, the starving cry of something interrupted. Moments later, the town's emergency sirens began to wail, their mournful sound signaling the end of the hour, the end of the silent carol. Doors opened. People emerged from their homes, their faces pale and shaken, but alive. Mara clung to her grandmother, trembling uncontrollably. "What were they?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Grandma didn't look at her. She stared at the snow-covered ground. "They were here long before Christmas existed," she said, her voice low and heavy. "They follow sound. The silent carol. It keeps him asleep. And if someone breaks the silence," Mara asked, already knowing the answer. Her grandmother didn't need to say anything. Mara's gaze was drawn back to her house. There, on the living room window she had looked through just minutes before, was a single, long scratch. It was fresh, deep, as if a massive claw had been dragged across the glass, and below it, etched into the frost by an unseen finger, were 3 words. A promise for the coming year. Next year, stay quiet. Thank you for listening to this tale of holiday horror. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Just maybe not during the silent carol. Stay safe, and see you next time. Snow fell like ash the night the town forgot how to celebrate. Streetlights winked out one by one, as if someone had walked the avenue and closed them with gloved hands. Indy Square, the statue of the town founder, wore a wreath of frozen barley. Its bronze face seemed to watch the houses, waiting. Evelyn came home early from the shop. The radio had been playing the same carol on a loop, the singer's voice thinning until it sounded like a memory. Her cottage smelled of cinnamon and the last of the baking. The tree in the corner was half decorated, its ornaments clustered like small, fragile moons. She set the kettle on the stove and noticed the clock on the mantel had stopped at 11:59. Outside, The wind carried a sound that was almost singing, a low, patient hum threading through the eaves. At midnight, the hum resolved into a single, clear bell. It didn't come from the church. It came from the lane behind her house, where the snow lay untouched. Evelyn wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the back door. Footprints led away from the lane and toward the wood's one set, then another, as if someone had walked and then walked back, erasing their own path. Between the prints, the snow had been pressed flat in a long, even trail, like the mark of something heavy being dragged. She followed the trail. The house suddenly felt too small, and the carols on the radio had stopped, leaving a silence that made her teeth ache. The town was empty. Curtains were drawn, and every window reflected her as a pale, solitary figure against the deepening dark. At the edge of the woods, the trail ended at a circle of trees. In the center stood a sleigh, black as a shadow and rimed with frost. Its runners sunk deep into the snow as if it had been there for years. There were no horses, no rein around the sleigh, and on its seat, a bundle wrapped in a child's blanket. Evelyn's first thought was that someone had left a gift. Her second thought was that the blanket moved not with the wind, but with a slow, deliberate breathing. She stepped closer. The air around the sleigh smelled of pine and something older, like the inside of an attic where old toys wait. When she reached out, the blanket shifted and a small hand slipped free. To still, its fingers curled around a tiny wooden soldier. The soldier's eyes were painted black, and when Evelyn looked into them, she felt a memory that wasn't hers. A kitchen table crowded with faces, a laugh that turned into a gasp, a candle blown out by a sudden draft. She dropped the soldier, and it rolled into the snow, leaving a trail of tiny, perfect footprints that led back toward the town. Behind her, the bell tolled again, and this time the sound came from every direction at once. The trees seemed to lean inward, and the sleigh's runners scraped against the snow as if someone had shifted their weight. Evelyn ran. She followed the soldiers' footprints as they threaded through the sleeping town like a stitch. Each house she passed had its front door open just a crack. Inside, the lights were on, but the people were not there. Chairs were set at tables with plates of untouched food. Stockings hung from mantels with their mouths gaping open. A child's drawing lay on a piano, its crayons still bright. The faces at the windows weren't faces at all, but reflections of the street, warped and waiting. When she reached her own doorstep, the bell tolled 12 times, and the clock on the mantel began to tick again. The tree in the corner had shifted. The ornaments were turned inward, their glass faces dull. On the floor the wooden soldier stood upright, its painted eyes fixed on the doorway. Evelyn felt the room grow colder, as if the house had inhaled and was now holding its breath. A voice came from the hallway, soft like paper being folded. "You found him?" it said. It wasn't a child's voice, nor an old man's. It was the sound of every voice that had ever sung carols in that town, layered and thin. Evelyn turned and saw in the mirror by the stairs, not her own reflection, but a corridor of rooms she recognized: a nursery with a rocking horse, a parlor with a cracked mirror, a church with candles guttering out. In each room, people stood very still, their mouths open in the shape of a song that never finished. She realized then what the bell had been calling for. For generations, the town had kept something at bay by singing together on Christmas Eve. The songs weren't just music. They were a promise, a warmth that kept the dark from stepping over the threshold. But this year, the singing had thin voices lost to late shifts, to grief, to the small, private resentments that gather like dust. The bell had told to remind them, and when no one answered, the thing in the sleigh had come to collect what was left. Evelyn could have run. She could have left the soldier and the sleigh and fled until the town was behind her and the dark could not reach her. But the soldier's painted eyes had a gravity that tugged at her chest. She thought of the child in the blanket and the way the town had once been full of voices that didn't let the dark in. She thought of the clock stopping at 11:59 and the way the bell had tolled like a question. She lifted the soldier and set it on the mantel beside the clock. She opened her mouth and sang. Her voice was small at first, a single thread in the cold. It trembled and cracked, but it held. From the houses down the lane, other voices answered, tentative, rusty, then stronger. Curtains parted, doors opened, and people stepped into the snow with their coats buttoned wrong and their hair askew. But they sang. The bell tolled with them, and the sleigh in the woods shivered as if struck by wind. For a moment, the thing recoiled. The air warmed. The ornaments on the tree caught the light. The soldiers' painted eyes seemed to soften. The town's faces in the mirror relaxed, and the nursery, the parlor, the church all brightened as if someone had lit candles behind their windows. Then the bell tolled once more, and the sound was not a warning but a counting. The sleigh's runners scraped, and the blanket in its seat unfurled like a flag. The thing in the sleigh folded itself into the song and became part of the chorus, a low undertone that made the carols sound fuller and older. The people singing felt a warmth that was almost relief, and they sang louder, thinking they had saved themselves. Evelyn felt the warmth too, but it smoothed the edges and erased the sharpness of memory. As the last verse rose, she realized with a cold clarity that the song was changing her. The faces in the mirror were smiling, but their smiles were all the same, practiced and perfect. The soldier's eyes were bright, and in them she saw not only the child, but the echo of every voice that had ever been swallowed by silence. When the final note faded, the town was still. The sleigh was gone. The footprints in the snow led nowhere. Inside, the clock read 12:30, and the mantel was empty except for a single wooden soldier standing at attention. Evelyn's throat felt hollow, as if she had swallowed a bell. She couldn't remember the exact words of the carol she had just sung, only the feeling of singing itself and the way it had filled the room. Outside, the wind began to carry a new sound, soft, distant, like sleigh bells moving away. In the window across the street, a family stood around a table, frozen mid-laugh, their mouths open in a song that would never finish. The town had been spared immediate ruin, but at a cost that tasted like forgetting. The bell would toll again next year, and the town would sing. They always did. They would sing until the song itself became the thing they guarded, until the memory of why they sang was as thin as the frost on the window. And somewhere beyond the trees, a sleigh waited, patient as winter, for the moment when the voices thinned and the bell tolled unanswered. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more Tales from the Shadows. See you next time.